Alright, so far we have been talking about general characteristics of what economics is concerned with, a little bit of history, some important figures in shaping modern economics. But now, beginning with this slide, we slowly dive into economic thinking and the principles on which economics is built upon. And the first principle is the principle of trade-offs. And you may still remember from an earlier slide when we looked at the definition of the economics as a science, then Lionel Robbins already mentioned that it studies human behavior that are subject to dealing with scarce resources and face trade-offs. So we have already seen that. So what is a trade-off? So a fundamental principle of economic reasoning is acknowledging that every economic action involves a trade-off. So for example, if you buy a coffee for $3, the opportunity cost is a foregone cake for $3. In other words, the price of the coffee is a foregone cake. That is how we think in economics. And money just serves as a simplification tool. So what you have to think is that in economics, prices are always relative prices. And whenever we buy something, there is an opportunity cost to it, so we forgo another opportunity. So when I buy a coffee for $3, I cannot have a cake for $3, so that's the opportunity cost. That's what I forgo, so I have to face a trade-off. Do I rather have a coffee or do I have rather a cake? So everything is analyzed within the framework of trade-offs. And as I mentioned, in microeconomics at least, money is simply a simplification tool. Yeah, I can say that the price of a cup of coffee in microeconomic terms is actually the foregone cake, but we just use money to simplify things. And what we also say in microeconomics is, and that is different to macroeconomics, that money is said to be neutral. So what does money neutrality mean? So let's assume we have market prices for coffee and cake. A coffee is $3 and a cake is $3. And of course what we say is that the price of the coffee is the foregone cake. So now let's say there is inflation and the price of coffee and the price of cake double to $6 each. So we have 100% inflation. So then money neutrality means that the price of a coffee, even though it is now $6, it is still a foregone cake. So only because there is inflation, that doesn't change the relative prices. And that is a distinct characteristic of microeconomics money neutrality. Money neutrality simply means if all the prices double, relative prices won't. But what matters is relative prices. But in macroeconomics, money is not neutral. So for example, if there is inflation in a certain country, then so-called non-tradable goods like real estate or services, things that cannot be shipped across the ocean, those are non-tradable goods, they tend to increase faster than tradable goods. So an example for a non-tradable good would be, for example, real estate. That's the mother of all non-tradable goods. And a tradable good, that might be coffee or tea. And so whenever there's inflation, not all the prices increase at the same rate as the increase in the money supply. Certain things like non-tradable goods, like real estate, they tend to increase much faster than tradable goods, Or, for example, wages. Labor is also more or less a non-tradable good, but wages tend to be sticky, and when there is inflation, people cannot ask for higher wages right away. But if, let's say, the oil price goes up, then higher oil prices can be passed on to consumers the very next day. But when people sign a contract in the labor market, they typically sign it for a year. So even if all the goods and services that we consume become more expensive, our wages do not go up immediately. So we call that sticky wages, and that is also a distinct macroeconomic assumption or observation. So again, everything is in terms of trade-offs in economics, and in microeconomics, the principle of discussing everything in trade-offs brings with it that we typically assume money neutrality, but in macroeconomics and in the real world, money is obviously not neutral, but for analytical purposes in microeconomics, we can make that assumption, but in macroeconomics, we will relax that assumption. Okay, so let's stop here.